I was seated near a decorative column, not behind it, just near enough that I wasn't quite visible from the head of the table. That felt intentional. The chair wobbled slightly, its leg uneven against the polished marble of the Hastings Estate dining hall. I adjusted my hand-painted silk scarf, the one I'd made during a quiet spring in Asheville. No one commented. No one asked how I'd been. To my left, my cousin Chase adjusted his cufflinks and asked Alexandra how the Paris apartment renovation was going. Across the table, my brother Nathan laughed at a joke he hadn't made, and my mother, Evelyn Hastings, lifted her wine glass with that practiced grace that had once graced the pages of Southern Living. She hadn't looked in my direction since I arrived. Then came the whisper. "She's not even a real Hastings," my mother murmured to someone on her right, low enough that she thought no one else could hear. But I heard, and so did the lawyer seated at the head. His name was Preston Wexler. He'd been my grandfather's legal counsel for decades. Silver hair, measured voice, eyes that scanned the room like a surgeon prepped for dissection. He waited for the hush. "We are gathered to execute the last will and testament of Edward Montgomery Hastings," he began. A man of deep convictions, occasionally unpopular ones. That drew a few polite chuckles. I didn't laugh. Item by item, the will unfolded like a performance. The Paris apartment, as expected, to Alexandra. The vineyard estate in Calistoga to Nathan. The Mercedes collection to my father, Charles. Jewelry, stocks, legacy assets. Everyone received their due. Everyone except me. I kept still. I'd learned that growing up as Juliet Blake, technically a Hastings biologically, but emotionally a misplaced piece in their polished puzzle. I'd chosen to teach art in a public school in Asheville, North Carolina. That had been enough to exile me. I thought perhaps I wasn't going to be mentioned at all. Then Preston adjusted his glasses and finally said, "Regarding the controlling interest in Hastings Legacy Group, the Charleston Estate, and 394 the consolidated investment portfolio valued at $526 million. The room went very still. "I hereby bequeath these assets in full to Ms. Juliet Elise Blake." A silence heavier than marble filled the space. My mother's wine glass shattered against the floor. Nathan stood up so quickly his chair skidded across the tile. Alexandra made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a scoff, but said nothing. I didn't move. Not yet. I looked at Preston. His eyes met mine with the faintest nod. Then, before anyone could speak, he added, "There's a video message from Mr. Hastings to accompany this clause. At his request, it will be played now." The screen came alive, and there he was, my grandfather, Edward Montgomery Hastings, staring straight into the camera. "If you're watching this," he began, "then you've just learned something unexpected." He smiled. I imagine the room is a mess. He wasn't wrong, and I had no idea what was coming next. My grandfather's voice faded, but his image remained frozen on the screen. Calm, intentional. Before the next words played, my mind had already gone somewhere else, back to the first time I realized I was invisible. I was 12. Alexandra had just won a regional debate competition, and there was a celebration dinner at the estate. My mother had commissioned a custom cake with Alexandra's face printed in edible gold. I'd made a card, hand-painted. I remember using burnt umber and ultramarine, colors I hadn't mastered yet. I placed it at Alexandra's seat. When dinner began, the card was gone. I found it later in the trash with a wine stain across the front. No one mentioned it. No one ever did. From that year forward, I stopped trying to be seen. At 17, I told my parents I'd been accepted into SCD, Savannah College of Art and Design. My mother paused only long enough to say, "I suppose we'll have to pretend that counts." That night, my grandfather called. Just him. No pretense. "Don't wait for their applause, Jules," he said. "They'll never clap for what they can't understand." It was the first time he called me that. Jules. He came to one of my student exhibitions. He didn't announce it. I only knew he'd been there because someone left a handwritten note tucked behind the frame of my watercolor series, the one with the broken door. Pure truth. Don't fix it. He never said it was him. He didn't need to. In my early 20s, I moved to Asheville, taught at a public high school, started leading community art programs for seniors. Most of my family thought I was in Oregon. I never corrected them. Alexandra went to Wharton. Nathan followed Dad into finance. Holiday cards came with staged photos and engraved signatures. Mine never arrived. I stopped checking the mail around December. Once, my name had been left off the donor plaque at a family event, though I'd contributed more than both my siblings combined. When I asked, Evelyn smiled and said, "Oh, that was probably a clerical thing. You know how these things happen, but they didn't happen to Alexandra or to Nathan, just to me." And yet, every few years, a small envelope would arrive. No return address. Inside, a newspaper clipping, a museum ticket, sometimes a quote written in fountain pen ink. One note simply said, "Character is quieter than legacy. Build the quiet thing." I kept them in a shoebox under my bed. The screen flickered. The video resumed. Edward Hastings leaned forward, eyes narrowing as if to pierce time. "You've all grown used to mistaking polish for worth," he said. "But I spent the last 15 years watching, not what you said, but what you chose not to see." Alexandra shifted in her chair. Nathan opened his mouth, but closed it again. And I sat there, that scarf still around my neck, wondering, had he been watching me this whole time, or had he been trying to teach me to watch myself? 3 weeks before the will reading, a letter arrived. Heavy cream cardstock, embossed crest, my name handwritten in ink that looked like it had never touched a printer. Miss Juliet Elise Blake, care of Winmere Public School, Asheville, North Carolina. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the kitchen counter next to my ceramic bowl of clementines, unopened for almost 2 days. When I did, it simply read, "You are requested to be present at the reading of the last will and testament of Edward M. Hastings. Location: the Hastings Estate, Charleston, South Carolina. Date: April 4th. Time: 2 p.m. There was no mention of what I'd been left. No hint of expectation, just that I was requested. Not invited, not required, requested. 2 days later, my mother called. The first call from her in 6 years. "Juliet," she said, her voice clipped and elegant. "I assume you received the correspondence." I held the phone an inch away from my ear. "Yes." "Well, you'll want to look presentable. There will be family attorneys." "The usual." "Of course," I said. She paused. Then, "Edward was fond of you." "No one's fault, really. Some men get sentimental in their later years." I didn't answer. She didn't expect me to. She ended the call with, "See you then, dear." That was all. I booked a train, not a flight. I couldn't stomach the idea of arriving quickly. Instead, I sat by the window for 8 hours, watching spring creep up the Carolina coast in patches, dogwoods blooming like secrets no one wanted to share. I wore the scarf, the same one I'd painted during the year I finally stopped asking to be let back in. I wasn't sure why I packed it, or maybe I was. Maybe it was armor. As the estate gates came into view, tall and too ornate for their own good, I felt something settle over me. Not anger, not grief, a strange kind of curiosity, like walking into a museum of a childhood you barely remembered but still knew how to navigate in the dark. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. The smell of jasmine near the windows. The hollow sound of heels across Italian tile. The way everyone greeted each other just a few decibels too loudly, as if trying to outmile whatever tension hung in the air. No one greeted me. But then again, no one told me to leave, so I stayed. I took the seat by the column and waited to find out why. The first 45 minutes of the will reading passed like a poorly directed play. Everyone pretending not to anticipate their moment, yet stealing glances toward Preston every time he inhaled. The Paris apartment to Alexandra, of course. The vineyard in Calistoga to Nathan. Naturally. The silverware collection to my father, Charles, and the jewelry to Evelyn, accompanied by a note in grandfather's handwriting that read, "For appearances." There were a few strained laughs. No one asked what that meant. I waited quietly as the gifts were passed out like acknowledgments of loyalty. Each item was met with nods, raised eyebrows, the small gestures of approval that people like my family mistook for love. I began to believe I wouldn't be mentioned at all. Perhaps I had misread everything, the notes, the scarf, the quiet visits. Perhaps, in the end, he had loved me, but not enough to disturb the balance. Then Preston adjusted his glasses. "And finally," he said, "regarding the controlling interest in Hastings' legacy group, the Charleston estate, and the consolidated investment portfolio, total valuation, $526 million. A breath caught in the room. "These assets are hereby bequeathed in full to Ms. Juliet Elise Flake." The silence wasn't immediate. It needed a moment to register. Then Evelyn's wine glass dropped. The stem snapped before it hit the floor. Nathan stood up so fast his chair scraped the tile and clanged against a marble leg. Alexandra blinked once, twice, then turned sharply toward Preston. My father didn't move, but his hand tightened around the edge of the table, knuckles white. All eyes turned to me. I remained still. I had learned the power of stillness in a family addicted to spectacle. Preston cleared his throat. "There is an additional instruction. At Mr. Hastings' request, a recorded message will now be played." A staff member dimmed the lights. The screen flickered again. There he was. My grandfather sat behind his old oak desk, the one with the carved lion's feet and hidden compartments. The lighting was soft, like he had known how this would feel. "If you're watching this," he said, "then you've just learned something unexpected. Or perhaps not." He smiled slightly. "Legacy, as I've come to understand, is not what you leave behind in dollars, but in decency, and most of you," his eyes seemed to search the room, "have mistaken polish for principle." Evelyn shifted in her seat. My father exhaled through his nose. Alexandra's expression didn't change. "Over the last 15 years, I've watched," he continued. "Not your business metrics, but your choices. Small ones, quiet ones." He began to list them. How Evelyn had refused to extend healthcare support to the housekeeper's family after her diagnosis. How Charles had buried a 7-figure loss using a shell firm in Bermuda. How Nathan had quietly settled a harassment claim without ever admitting fault, naturally. How Alexandra had forced a whistleblower out of the philanthropic arm after it made the papers. No one interrupted. The room had calcified. "And Juliet," he said, finally turning. My breath caught. "She never asked for a seat at this table. She built her own." He leaned in slightly. "Character doesn't perform. It persists." Then the video ended. For a moment, no one spoke, and then Alexandra asked the question. I couldn't believe she still had the nerve to ask, "Is this contestable?" Preston blinked. "Legally, no." Edward ensured all counsel reviewed the revisions. "The trust structure has already been enacted." Another silence, and I just sat there in the chair by the column, wondering, had I really been the plan all along, or had I simply been the last one left standing? That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from joy, and certainly not from triumph. There's a strange loneliness that comes from being seen too clearly, like standing under a spotlight after decades in the wings. I lay on the guest bed in the East Wing suite, formerly reserved for press. The sheets still smelled of lavender and starch. Outside the window, the marsh grass whispered with every gust of wind, like it knew something I didn't. My phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m. One new message, "Alexandra, I think we need to talk. Just us sisters. Grandpa wouldn't want this to divide us." At 2:32 a.m., another one from Nathan. Not judging, just confused. "This doesn't make sense. Maybe legal can fix it." And then at 3:04 a.m., the call I knew would come. My mother. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. "Juliet, I'm not angry. I think you're overwhelmed." You don't know how these things work. We should meet with family council and go through the details together. There's a lot to unpack. Edward was old. He could be manipulated. She never said by you, but I heard it. It felt rehearsed, like the same script she'd used with donors or reporters or employees she wanted to quietly remove. By morning, I hadn't responded. I'd packed my bags, but I wasn't sure where I'd go next. The estate didn't feel like mine, only like a house left empty by someone who saw too much. When I stepped into the library to clear my head, a staff member approached. "Miss Blake," he said, "there's something for you." It was left with instructions. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name on it. My full name, written in a hand I'd recognize even blindfolded. Juliet Elise Blake. Inside was a letter. "Jules, if you're holding this, it means I've done what I couldn't say aloud. I know this inheritance will not feel like a gift at first. It's a burden. You were always the only one who understood the difference. You won't need them to help you, but you may still want to help them. That's your strength and your temptation. Don't let kindness become your chain. The company is yours. So is the legacy, but your life, that's still only yours to shape. Don't go back to being small just so they can stay comfortable." The paper shook in my hand. I read it again, not for clarity, but for confirmation. He'd known they'd try to make me feel unworthy. He'd known they'd use guilt instead of anger. He'd known I might fall for it, but he had left me something better than money: permission. The family summoned me to the conservatory. Not officially, of course. No one used words like summon when you were supposedly part of them again, but the message was clear. Everyone would be there, and it was just a conversation. I walked in 5 minutes late, deliberately. They were already seated. My father by the glass wall, arms crossed. Evelyn in a pale blue dress, too soft for the sharpness in her voice. Alexandra and Nathan at either end of the curved sofa, like opposing counsel. There was tea on the table. No one had poured mine. Evelyn spoke first. "Juliet, this isn't about money." "Of course it wasn't. It's about preserving what your grandfather built." Nathan added, "We're not here to argue." Alexandra leaned forward. "You don't have to do anything drastic. Just delegate. Let Preston handle the transitions. You don't need to be involved day to day." I didn't say anything. My silence stretched. "Look," said Charles finally. "We all know he loved you. That's not the issue. But you're not experienced in this world." I looked around the room. They didn't want to take it back outright. That would make them look greedy. They wanted me to feel unqualified enough to give it up myself. "I understand your concern," I said slowly. Evelyn visibly relaxed. "I understand it because you've never once asked what I've done, what I built, who I became." I took a step forward. "You saw me painting scarves and thought I'd failed. You saw me teaching and thought I'd given up. You saw me quiet, so you assumed I was nothing." No one interrupted. I pulled a folded paper from my bag, set it on the table. "My name is on the legal registration of Hastings Legacy Group as of 6 months ago. Grandfather made me CEO in escrow. Quietly, so I could learn." Alexandra blinked. "That's not possible." "It is," I said. "He brought me in under a consulting firm when none of you bothered to notice. I've been reviewing board strategy for 9 months. I restructured 3 departments you thought Preston handled." Nathan stood. "Why wouldn't he tell us?" "Because he already knew you wouldn't listen." I turned to Evelyn. "Do you remember saying I wasn't a real Hastings?" She flinched. Slight, but it was there. "I'm not here to punish you. I don't need you to approve of me. I don't need a reconciliation dinner or a new group photo. I came here because he trusted me to finish what he started, and I will." The room fell quiet. Then Evelyn whispered, "You've changed." I smiled. "No. I just stopped shrinking." I reached for the teapot, poured myself a cup, stirred it slowly, and now I said, "I suggest you decide if you're capable of working under someone you once dismissed." Alexandra's jaw tightened. Nathan stared at the floor. No one responded, so I took my tea and walked out. Not in anger, just in finality. 3 months later, I stood in the center of the Hastings boardroom, not as a guest, not as a shadow, as the woman whose name was now etched into the mahogany plaque outside the door. Juliet Elise Blake, Chief Executive Officer, Hastings Legacy Group. The transition wasn't quiet. Some board members quit. A few investors panicked, but most stayed, not out of loyalty, but out of curiosity. They wanted to see what the ghost child of the Hastings family would do with the empire she was never supposed to touch. I didn't burn anything down. I restructured the foundation arm, reinstated the whistleblower program, doubled the salary of support staff. At our first press gala, I didn't invite Evelyn, Charles, Alexandra, or Nathan, not to punish them, to let the silence finally speak louder than all their words. Instead, I invited people my grandfather had quietly supported: scholarship recipients, former groundskeepers, community organizers. A few of them cried when they saw the nameplate at the podium. So did I. In my first speech, I didn't talk about legacy or dynasty. I talked about repair. Sometimes, I said, we inherit the damage more than the wealth, but we also inherit the chance to choose differently. Applause followed, not roaring, but real. Afterward, I returned to the estate. I walked into the old studio on the third floor, the one no one had entered in years. He'd left it untouched. Still there, the unfinished oil painting of the family marshlands at dusk. Sky half done, a single white egret sketched but never filled. I remembered the last time I'd seen him work on it. "You going to finish that?" I had asked, half joking. He'd smiled. "No, that's for you." I hadn't understood then. Now I did. I picked up the brush. The paint was dried, but I didn't mind. I opened new tubes, soft ochre, pale blue, the same ultramarine I'd used as a child, and I filled in the sky. Not perfectly, not as he would have done, but in my own hand. When I stepped back, the egret was finally flying, and that was enough. The next Christmas, I received a card from Evelyn. No handwriting, just a generic printout with a photo of the family. Alexandra, holding a glass of wine. Nathan standing near the tree. Charles in the background, looking distracted. They'd sent it to the corporate office. Inside, it said, "Wishing you peace this season. You are, of course, always welcome." There was no signature, no mention of what they'd done or not done. No apology, no acknowledgement, just the word welcome. I placed the card on my desk, stared at it for a full minute, then quietly opened the drawer. From the same place where I kept his letters, I pulled out the oldest one, the one that only said, "Build the quiet thing." I took a pen, wrote 3 words on the Christmas card. I was there. Then I placed it back in an envelope. No return address, no message. I mailed it to the estate. No one replied. A week later, I visited the gallery in downtown Charleston that now hosted part of our new community art initiative. The walls were full of donated works, pieces from anonymous creators who never had a chance to show their voice. In the back corner was one of my own. Small, simple, a watercolor of a chair, worn velvet, slightly off balance, tucked behind a column. Its title scrolled underneath, "Scene." I didn't wait to hear reactions. I left through the side entrance into the winter wind that rolled off the harbor. No scarf this time. I didn't need it.